Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. On this episode, our very first episode, we're starting simple with just the three of us. That's me, Janice, the owner and host at Cozy Rock Cabin in Freeport, Maine, and Justin and Shaun, two of the owners and hosts at the Chal-A Frame in Stratton, Vermont. So welcome. We can't wait to introduce you to what we're creating and to the three of us as humans and as cabin owners and lovers. Thanks for joining us. We are so grateful that you're here. Oh, and one more thing. I really wish I were kidding when I tell you that I accidentally recorded this entire episode with my microphone facing the wrong way. So many apologies for my low quality audio. Thankfully, Justin and Shaun knew what they were doing, and I promise this will never happen again. Thanks for your patience as we figure this all out. So welcome to the very first episode of Cabin Culture.
Very excited to be kicking this off. Feel great.
I think we made this happen a lot quicker than I expected, honestly.
Record time.
Yeah.
Record time. Okay, I'm going to start by setting the scene where we are. Okay. Yes. Yeah. We are in an 800 square foot cabin with 4 humans and 3 dogs. So if you hear a dog, that's probably why. The wood stove has been roaring all day, so it's maybe 80 degrees in here, but we've opened a couple windows, so we're getting to a manageable temperature. Surrounded by Justin and Shaun of the Chal-A Frame. I'm Janice of Cozy Rock Cabin, and we are recording our very first podcast. So here we are, your first trip to Cozy Rock Cabin, first impressions.
What I said to Janice when I got here is it's better than pictures. I mean, you really got to be here to feel it. I mean, the sunlight coming through obviously we picked a nice clear day. We lucked out. It was great coming down the driveway. I don't think we've seen too many angles of it from that view, but it was, yeah, so far it's been great. We got the full tour. I think we're going to be at a fire a little bit later, so we're excited for that.
What's not to love? I paid them before this podcast, just FYI.
Yes.
What did you think, Shaun?
I liked the way it was tucked away, and I think I was partial to the Chal-A Frame because we were so tucked away, and we came down a dirt road. That made me happy too, and that you're this close to the town too, which is super cool. And you have beautiful back area to it. Love that.
The rock, of course.
The rock's huge.
One of the coziest rocks I've ever seen, to be honest. I haven't seen a cozier one, so we're excited about that.
Yeah, so let's chat briefly. We're going to use this podcast as our first one, just the three of us, so that folks can kind of get a chance to know us behind the pictures that they see on social media. So why don't we start real quick before we interview each other with just talking about how this podcast came to life, what our hopes and dreams are for it, what is the vision for what we're doing. So I'll let you guys start with that.
Originally, the thought was you're mostly scrolling through Instagram, you're seeing all these pictures of these places, you little captions, comments, but you never really get enough time to really dive into it. So we thought this could be a good platform to really kind of dive deep into some of these people, hosts, photographers, designers, architects, everybody else, builders, and really get their story. A lot of these people, their voices aren't heard yet. So I think this is a good opportunity to really interview these people and do a good deep dive. I think we can uncover a lot of things. So
I think there's an interesting mix of, we noticed when we started the page and started sharing our build was that people were both interested in maybe building their own and just also interested in our story. We've had people comment just hey, I'm just following along. And I think sharing more about that and just being involved in this kind of culture that is a part of getting away. And I think the timing has a lot to do with it too, with this pandemic thing where a lot of people are just trying to get out and explore too. So I think all that came together in something that needed to be done with more depth than just 15-second stories or a picture or even a reel. Music.
Just kind of scratching the surface, I feel like, so we can get much deeper, I think, here.
Totally. I find that on stories, I get so annoyed when it cuts me off after 30 seconds, which should be more than enough. But I'm no, it's more complicated than that. And you find yourself having to synthesize everything down to 30-second bite-sized shareable pieces. Yeah. I'm well, it's not always that simple. For me, the frustration mostly comes from questions and DMs where everyone wants information. And I can totally relate to that because in the midst of the build, I did too. But having been on the other side, there's just not quick answers to a lot of this stuff. It is really nuanced, and you really do have to do the research yourself first. Right. And I struggled to find resources that engaged in more of the like nuance and depth, and not just the like, here's my cost per square foot, here's my builder, here's the color of my siding, but all the pieces that go behind that, I think.
And there's so many angles too of different types of people that are involved. I think culture is a good word for it, because there's people that are just interested in the builds. They're interested in the way things look. There's travelers, there's photographers, there's hosts, there's designers, there's interior designers. There's so many people involved in this very specific community that I think, speaking to all of them, there's people interested in all their stories and what they're up to.
Yeah. I got a question just this morning that was like, do you struggle? Your audience is a mix of travelers, hosts, people in the Airbnb space. Like, how do you speak to all of them? And I was like, wow, I've never really, like, I know that that's real because I hear from all of them, but I've never thought of that as an obstacle. In fact, I kind of like that there's all these people interested in the same things that I'm interested in for different reasons. I think that's what interests me about this being called cabin culture, and engaging people from all parts of that, whether it's other hosts, people who just like going to cabins, people who are dreaming about building a cabin. Like, there's just so many different people involved in that world, all bringing different perspectives. And I guess I kind of view that as a strength, not necessarily like something we have to like work through.
No, I think it's awesome exploring each piece of it.
Yeah. Cool. So let's dive in. We're going to do this first episode. We're going to have different folks on in the future. But for this episode, it's just us three. So we're going to take turns interviewing each other. So why don't you start by telling us about the Chal-A Frame in an elevator pitch format? So a short 30-second version of what you've created. I'll let each of you give your own version since there are two of you. And I should probably clarify that there are 3 people who run the Chal-A Frame. And you all will probably share more about that. 2 of you are here today and are going to be working on the podcast with us. But there is a third behind the Chal-A Frame. And I don't want to forget about him either. So why don't you each give us the 30-second?
The 30-second elevator pitch would be an escape from a city in a glamping manner that gives you access to all the things that Vermont has to offer while still being secluded. I think it came from a place of research initially to try and figure out where we could place this thing that people would be interested year round. And I think Vermont makes that easy because there's activities going around. And on top of all that, some place where we could have fun as friends and family to go up there and just hang out and relax and get away from, texts, notifications, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the location, like you said, is great. I mean, we're located right between 2 major ski areas, Stratton and Mount Snow, and right off of Route 100, but far enough where honestly you can't see a street light. We barely have neighbors. So you're pretty isolated. You kind of feel like you're in your own world. Yeah, I think it all started, and it starts with the land. And that's the first thing you're looking at is, where are we going to put this? And you walk a lot of pieces of land, and it's like, how are you deciding if this land is better than that piece? You can't walk 2 acres of land and tell, but you kind of go out there, you get a feel for it, and then you just pull the trigger, and then you go.
Sweet. I'm going to ask you questions about the build coming up next, for sure, because I have a lot of questions about that. But I am kind of intrigued by the human side of this first, because you are the first cabin that I followed on Instagram that is a team of folks who are not married. So not necessarily that you all aren't married, but aren't married.
Me, Shaun, and Ryan are not married, yes.
And that's unique, I feel like, from what I've seen in the cabin world. So can you describe the dynamic of the 3 of you who are behind the Chal-A Frame and kind of how that partnership came to be?
Yeah, I think it starts probably initially, I don't know, there's a lot of pieces to it. Justin and I went to college together for architecture, graduated in 2013 with a master's in architecture. Shortly after that, got me a job at the company he was working at after college. And we're doing, architecture related things, but I think in architecture school, you're doing a lot of designing, creating with no bounds. They give you some bounds, but it's very creative. And when you get into the workforce, 9 to 5, especially in the real world, there's not there's not so many creative opportunities, and there's a lot more rules. So we were looking, I think we didn't know it maybe, but we were looking for something to kind of branch out and do something creative. And Justin had been in real estate for a little bit, long-term real estate. And I think we starting to find like a path that way.
Yeah, I think we needed kind of, I guess you can call it a passion project, which is maybe cliche, but I think we needed that. We needed like a creative outlet, somewhere we could really just let loose and design something cool. I mean, originally us three were designing it kind of for ourselves. I guess I was, that might sound selfish, but we started that way, and then we thought maybe we can turn this into a rental and something we can share with others. That could be a cool thing, which did kind of impact some of our design decisions, but we loved it. I mean, that was putting some constraints on it, so it kind of gave us some resistance to work around, and that's like when you can get creative, when you have these boundaries. So we thought, so we just started going with it, and then my brother Ryan, who's also involved, he's obviously not here, but he's an accountant by day, but he just needed something else that you can kind of just get creative and let loose, and we can all just sit around a table and just like get ideas going and have it come together. And I mean, again, we made it for ourselves, but then we made it to share with everyone else, obviously through renting, but that's kind of how we got started, I guess.
I think going back to your whole like team thing and not married people, pre-Chal-A, we actually have an investment in a multifamily rental. So
the three of you do.
Yeah. And I think that kind of bridged the gap a little bit to making it easier. We already had that on our plate. And then from the very beginning, we were saying we had a really good team dynamic. Justin and I have been friends for a long time. I lived with his brother for a few years before that, and we all kind of had lanes that I think we were comfortable in that all came together to make this successful. Justin has project management experience. I'm a little bit better on the technology and media side of things. We both went to school for design. Ryan could handle all the paperwork and money and stuff like that. And it seemed like everyone could just kind of take down what they wanted to take down, and we would get the job done.
Okay, so the teamwork aspect is really fascinating to me in terms of how you split things up. You were mentioning a little bit about your lanes of genius in terms of skill set, but I think the area that likely gets the most tricky for a lot of people who would split something like this is the financial stuff. How did you work through any tricky elements of that, like conflicts in what we splurge on, what we don't splurge on, what we need to make, how often we can use it? What did those conversations look like early on?
It's always been a group chat. And it's always been 3 thumbs up. Yeah. 3 thumbs up emoji is how we decide on things. If we don't have 3, we don't move forward, or we listen to everyone's decisions. I think Justin has a really good design eye. So Ryan and I usually take kind of a more backseat to that. If Justin brings up something and kind of pitches it, we can say, oh, we can see it that way, or, and he has in mind how much money we have to spend anyway. So it's like, it's never getting crazy. But like things like the stair was really expensive and
beautiful,
but beautiful
and nice. And we all came to the conclusion that that would be a big piece of what we're building, and it was worth the money.
Yeah, so things like that. And then that's what we looked at as like money well spent. So there's certain features of the house where, I mean, you don't ever want to admit to making cuts, but like that's the reality of it. You only have so much money to spend.
Ooh, tell me about that. What was one cut that you had to make that you are like, oh, I wish we didn't have to do that?
One cut was definitely not the staircase. I'm trying to think. I mean, unfortunately, honestly, I think the cut we made was our labor into the house. I think because we worked on it so much ourselves, we were able to maybe spend a bit more on materials because we weren't paying a crazy amount for someone else to do it, which is good and bad. Bad because we spent a lot of weekends there working, but good because then we can say, okay, we want this higher end finish, and we can put this in ourselves, and we'll save money there. But when we couldn't do that, I'm trying to think where we
I don't know if we were ever like married to something that was too expensive, honestly, that we're like, we can't do that. I think a lot of the things were just like, oh, we can do that in the future. So, we picked things that were along the lines of like, we can get this done. It's going to look good this way, and we'll make up the money elsewhere or something.
And again,
like
it's kind of like you don't want to ever admit to making those cuts, but you just more see it as, I mean, that's just the whole creative process. So it's like, you have a budget. That's a reality. So that's a constraint. And you have all these other size limitations or furniture pieces. So this was just another constraint that you had to add to the mix. So it's like in the end, I wouldn't say, oh, we made a cut here. I would just say like we went through the whole process and we ended up here. So it's like you always feel good about it. You never feel like, oh, we cheaped out on the cabinets or something. But
it's like part of the creative exercise of it. Like you wanted a creative outlet, and without constraints, it's actually not that creative.
Which isn't fun.
You need a little bit of constraints, whether it's the land and what it presents, the
Otherwise,
budget.
you just make a twisty tower and it goes around. I mean, it's no fun. So it's good to have some constraints for sure.
What was the biggest fight that you got in during the build? Be honest with the people.
Source of conflict. Front and back of the A-frame was, and that's not something that like ends up being a big part of the design, but like initially when we were laying it out, we were trying to figure out what's the back and what's the front. You arrive on the back of what we designed, and then the front would be
I still disagree,
on the
but
north.
I'd say the front is the glass wall. Shaun says the front is the back door wall where the bedrooms are. I think that was our only disagreement. I don't think we have agreed on it yet. So I think,
and it didn't really impact the build. It's more just what you call it.
Yeah,
so it actually doesn't
it was
matter.
very confusing.
Okay, this is a pretty good answer.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I think otherwise, I think we all agreed on most things. It turned out pretty well. Hey guys, this is Justin from the Chal-A. If you're not already listening to this podcast in a cabin or on your way to one, I'd just like to take a second to let you know that our spring calendar is open, along with a few winter nights to get that last-minute ski trip in before the season ends. I'd also like to remind you that our A-frame comfortably sleeps up to 6 guests. We're located just 10 minutes to Mount Snow, 15 minutes to Stratton Mountain, and we're surrounded by tons of trailhead access, including the famous Long Trail. Oh, and the food and drink scene here in Vermont is incredible, since most of it's either raised, crafted, caught, or brewed locally, so you definitely don't want to miss out on this. But to learn more, you can find a link to our page in the show notes below. We hope to see you soon, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the actual cabin, which we've touched on, but there are a lot of A-frames popping up recently. It feels like a very trendy, although actually it's kind of vintage, but like it's coming back as just a popular build.
Right.
Why the A-frame for you all, and what makes yours different from a lot of the other ones that one might see?
I think location probably was the biggest part of our build, more so than the design. I think we also thought an A-frame was simpler to build than something else. So it was.
Turns out it's not.
No, it's not. It's not. Or whoever we worked with didn't see it that way either. But yeah, I think we went into it thinking this will be, simple. We pictured it from the beginning as a roof on the ground. So we were like, this is no problem. Like if anyone can build a house, they could build a roof on the ground. I think it's equally as complicated as, a normal house build. We like kind of simple, clean forms, and that stuck out to us. And that was kind of what we were seeing in the Instagram community when we were kind of looking through this and dreaming up this idea. And we just ran with it. And
I think it's just like that form, that like pure symmetry in the woods. It's like, I'm just a sucker for that. I'm just a sucker for it. So it's like you got the woods, and as long as you're, surrounded and tucked into the right setting, which we are.
We were excited about the history of it too.
Yeah. I mean,
in like the 70s as something that was quote unquote simple to build, but they popped up all around the ski areas, and that's where we were looking to build. So we thought that fit well with the kind of story we were trying to build. And I think it was clean and sharp, and we thought we could accomplish it.
And you did.
We did.
Here we are. When did you open and launch? Was this
September 1st? Was when we put it live on Airbnb. So we just made it for the fall. Yeah, that was our whole thing. Was like, if we can open for the fall, we'll be good. I mean, even though it took a lot longer than we expected, we're like, if we can just make it through the summer, be ready for all the leaf peepers in the fall.
Sneaky note though, if your plan is to open something for the fall, I would say shoot for the season before, because we're taking pictures in the summer, which still came out, great to be able to list it. But we had no pictures of it as we wanted it to open in the fall, and that was our best spot. So we ended up getting a few people in there and getting some pictures, but I think we could have done better on that.
or just people planning ahead for the fall. If you're going to travel in the fall, you might be making those plans in the summer. And we're like, all right, it's fall. Who wants to come? And everyone had already made their plans, which it still worked out fine again. But if I would have done it better, I would have been open in the summer. Took the summer, maybe a little hit there. Been completely good for the fall.
Yeah. And looking back at the build, because a lot of folks that I've talked to are either in the process of building or wanting to build. What was the biggest thing you all learned through the build? And what was the biggest mistake that you made in the build? Thing that you would do differently if you were to do it tomorrow?
Pick a better builder for sure.
Tell me more about that.
I mean, it's tough because when we did it, it was we bought the land in February right before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, so it was 2020 when we were planning the whole thing. So we were getting everything engineered, we were finding a builder, getting all the material, the quotes and everything. So it wasn't really the ideal time to buy the piece of land in retrospect, but not for planning the build. We reached out to a lot of builders. A lot of them obviously were busy at that time. And we met this one, and we had a great relationship with them, and we actually met up a lot on site, and it was great. And I think just like everyone else, he might have got busy. He didn't have like a full crew. He was kind of a one-man show, but a nice guy. He showed us some of his work, and it was really nice. So we felt good about him, and we'd keep talking, before we pulled the trigger and went under contract with him. Like, how do we feel about him? And it's like, oh, the guy seems like a good guy, solid guy. We met up with him enough. He gets the vision, which we thought, which is also important to make sure if you're doing something special like an A-frame or even just a cabin, like they need to buy into it. Like they need to get the vision. This is not a spec home. Yeah. There's going to be things in here that are quirky, that might not make sense, or weird finishes that aren't typical in a normal home. So like they're going to try to push something, and you got to just really, hold your ground and say, no, this is what I want.
I
Trust
need you
me.
to understand my
Yes. And it's tough because at the same time you're balancing, you want a good relationship. So it's very hard to stay firm, but then also say, to not piss them off because that's your builder. So yeah, I think looking back, I don't think we could have done anything better. I think I still felt good about our decision that we made, but I think he just got busy. And
I'd give a ton of the credit to Justin because he put a push on something that I don't think was priority while we were building. So, and you have to, we didn't have a project manager. We were the project managers and mostly Justin, and you have to keep, because your project gets pushed off for the next one, that squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah, that's real.
So, and we have a timeline too to make. It can't take forever. There's financial parts of that too that are in motion. So you have to be able to communicate with your builder, and you have to be able to put your foot down and really make a stand when things aren't going the way you want it to. And he did it time and time again.
That was you, Justin?
Yeah, mostly.
You were the squeaky wheel?
I was the squeaky wheel, yeah. I was in
like a very, very calculated way, and nothing ever got out of hand. And I think it was really well done, but it's not in my personality to do that. And again, like the whole team thing, he took it on and put his head down on that, and I put my head down on other stuff, and Ryan did too. So I think that ended up working out, or else I might have passed away from stress.
Yeah, it was stressful, definitely.
And how
stressful.
are you feeling, Justin?
So, definitely stressful. But I knew going in, obviously it wasn't going to be smooth. You're building a new house. We're from Massachusetts, so we're doing it remote. We had a builder, but I knew there was going to be a certain level of managing the manager, I guess. But yeah, then it just didn't work out. We obviously had to have our best interest in mind. So
at what point did you leave your builder? Like, was there a moment where you were like, I can't keep doing this?
It was kind of like how do they say it these days? A silent
quitting?
Yeah, silent quitting.
Silent quit?
Well,
you ghosted your builder? Yes. Or he silently quit on you?
I think almost.
Well, almost the other way, but yeah, it just
ended up like we needed things done, and luckily Justin and his dad and Ryan are pretty handy in that. They've done renovations for the long-term places. So it just became, okay, then we have to do it. And then, okay, then we'll have to do that. And then it was just like, we got deadlines to meet and other contractors coming in. Like, it needs to be done by this time or else we're in deep trouble. And him and his dad and Ryan would show up and do whatever needed to get done so that we could get the next trade in there.
Yeah, which I think, I don't know, sometimes it's good knowing how to, like, be handy and knowing how to do these things, because you can always fall back on that as a crutch. But then sometimes I try to pretend like I don't know how to do these things, because I think, like, I'm going to fall back on that, and that's where the mess happens. Like, I got to just stay focused on my builder doing the thing that we hired him to do. But I think maybe he was more passive by nature, and he might have got too busy. So we kind of put us on the back burner. He didn't have a big crew, so we had like a guy. If that guy was busy for 4 months, he's like, well, he'll be ready in the spring. And it's like, well, we can't wait, that long. So I'd have to go out and find people to do it. And now I'm managing them while he's got, people there, and it got messy. And then we'd have to go in there, and there's so much stuff, people think when you build a house, it's, plumbing, HVAC, framing, but there's so many little things that bridge all the gaps of all the trades. And this guy didn't make the wall thick enough, so I can't do my thing here. And now you got to go up there on a weekend, spend the weekend framing things. And yeah, it definitely got messy. But again, we knew we had to get it done, and we had a timeline, and so we kind of had to get involved. But it was definitely harder being from Mass, doing this in Vermont, having no connections.
How far is the drive?
It was an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes.
So not right around the corner.
Right.
It takes a trip. And you couldn't stay
trip
there. Where did you stay when you were doing it?
I would just come home at like
You just do it for
late.
the day.
Yeah. So we'd go up there bright and early and come back really late, and it was pretty exhausting. But I'm happy we did it at this point. Yeah, it's done.
It out, but
so we had to get it
near
done.
the end of it. I think we were saying this needs to happen way different next time.
Yeah.
We need to find someone we're very comfortable with, that we can, whatever money we will have to pay for that, that's so valuable.
But you can trust them with their piece of it and just worry about.
And it's just being extremely transparent in the beginning about schedule, about budget, about, essentially their schedule, their manpower, how many guys do they have? Like, can they take this job on, and maybe hold them to a contract? Our contract was a little loose. These were certain kind of decisions we had to make to get the job going. So, but yeah, make sure you focus on your builder. That's extremely important. Big takeaway, key takeaway, big, yeah.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about branding, because there's so many short-term rentals that are popping up, and more of them you're seeing on Instagram, which is how we met and how probably a lot of the folks listening to this have found us. How did you all think about branding? I feel like it's more important now that there's so many people in this space. How did you all think about that from the early stages of the build? Did you think about it? What did that look like?
That's kind of how this whole thing happened, I want to say.
Oh, it started with branding?
This was
I mean,
we're branding guys.
Me and Shaun have always had a thing where we like to just, I don't know, we do little spitball exercises. We like to come up with funny names or whatever else. But we had talked about making a cabin, and then one day I was at work and I was eating lunch, and I was just like looking through the Instagram, looking at different people's names, and they all had like kind of little fun, creative names. And I was just like, oh, like how could we spin on like A-frame or something? Like that would be cool. And then I was just looking into like, branching out on like, cabins, cottages, chalets. And then I was like, oh, chalet's cool. I looked into chalet. I was like, oh, mountains and the Alpines. I was like, oh, chalet. And I was like, oh, what if it was chalet? Like Chal with an A-frame. And I immediately obviously texted Shaun while I was at lunch.
Not the group chat, just
Shaun at this point. There was still no group chat. I said, hey, Shaun, how about the chalet or the Chal-A Frame? And I sent him my thought process, and then, he sent me obviously a gift. That's how we talk mostly. I
think I said, take my money, and then I sent a gif of cash being thrown.
So then we got really excited about the name. Shaun immediately went on, took the IG handle, made a Facebook page. I mean, it was
right way to do it right there, friends.
Completely premature. I mean, this
Step one. Just confirm the IG handle.
Yeah. So it was completely, whatever. We did it our own way. And then obviously we text Ryan, we're like, hey man, you want to build a cabin? Here's what the name's going to be. I think it's going to be an A-frame. We're not sure where. I don't know any other details. And he's like, yeah, I'm in. He's like, let's do this. And then
the branding served you well from the very beginning. You recruited your third team member solely based on the name.
I think, yeah.
It gives you a good, direction, I think, when we could talk about it. I think we even had like a pretty long meeting at Justin's house to begin talking about like what specifically we wanted. I had been watching Kyle Dempsey's videos, and I liked the way he was capturing New England, and I got all inspired and like, we could do this and this with zero camera experience, by the way. I was like, I could figure this out. And we had a lot of talks about like what we're going to show, in this whole build. And I think initially we were all like we're not on camera. We're not, none of our faces. And it shows all the way to here until we met Janice. And then she forced us on camera.
Yeah, every conversation. Why aren't you guys ever on camera?
Well, yeah, that was tough. And I realized looking back, probably wasn't the best decision maybe, but our thought.
I think the thought was like, it was more about the stay than like us. But somewhere along the line, I think when I was capturing pictures, there's like only so much you can take of like framing and stuff without people in it. And then I started to, as they were comfortable with like not paying attention to the camera and me just getting whatever. And we started, putting together stuff more that way. And then we finally took like a picture all together at the very end of it,
And it's unfortunate because looking back, I guess it's like, it makes sense because it's like you have this house, but then it's like after we're done building it and everything's behind us, it's like there's always people behind the house. So it's like, I think that's what people are interested in. It's like this house doesn't just get built by magic. Like there was a lot of stuff in the works, the personality on these people, like what kind of people like built such a house.
And you guys are fun guys too. It's not like you're void of personality, which would be a reason to not show yourselves on camera. I feel like if you're like, I don't have much to offer, but that's not the case.
Right. And I think we thought that a lot. Like, oh man, like, and I think we thought the same way. Like, there's not like just like three guys doing this. Like, a few friends just building an A-frame. Like I think we have something cool here. And I don't know, we just never
even
did
that
it.
scenario, 3 friends building, I've never seen that before on Instagram. So that became almost more endearing because I was like, how are they doing this?
Well,
like,
we're 3 friends building an A-frame.
3 best friends that anyone could have.
So anyway, we missed that, but
yeah. And I think there's an initial part where Justin and I have like had car talks where we've said that if we don't make use of the internet in our lifetime for like work purposes, then we like failed our parents because like they got us to this point. And if there's some way we could build on top of that using something that they didn't have, and like the internet's the most powerful thing that exists, period. And it's like, we can make use of this. Yeah, exactly. And we were like, okay, let's do something creative that we're all interested in, which is real estate, which is design, which is everything. Something that financially makes sense, something that we could either be flat on or make some money on as a business. And then something that can grow using, the advantage of internet and sharing and social media. So all that came together, and that was kind of the vision. And then somewhere along the line, we talked to you and we realized how excited you were about the stay and the experience. And I think that kind of started to build into what we're doing. Like, oh, we need to figure this out a bit more because we're going to have people staying there eventually. And we were just thinking of the build. So.
Well, one step in front of the other. I had been hosting before too, so that makes it easier. I never had to worry about a build with the first one. I could just dive right into hosting. So that's where my brain by default went.
Which I think is very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. But once you got past the build, I mean, it's kind of hard if you've never hosted before. It's kind of hard to think about this thing that you've never done when you have this huge thing in front of you that you have to get through first. So.
Or it's just like switching gears so quickly. It's just like all you're thinking about 24 hours a day is this build. We got to get this thing. I called this guy. We got to finish this, finish that. And all of a sudden it's done. And now it's just like, oh, well, now we got to figure this whole
other big thing.
Which is an entire thing that obviously there's plenty, of information on. So it's like there was a lot to learn quickly.
I think going back to that like initial creative thing, we still have that. And we learned a ton of stuff on this first build and had a ton more ideas that we wanted to incorporate into something. So I think it's like, how can we do this better or bigger or, make a cooler experience for people? And we've started to learn that like trying to branch out from like a less generic. I think we built a pretty solid A-frame, but the next one, what gets people excited about it, they haven't seen an A-frame before or stayed in one. And it's like, okay, so for the people that have stayed in an A-frame, how can we make it even cooler to stay? So, just that creative aspect.
I think this is why it gets addicting for people. And I think there are cases where it's financial and you see, I'm making X amount of money on this one. But I actually don't think that's the driving factor for most people. I think it's this, to get into this, you have to have a desire for some creativity.
In this space,
especially in the cabin space. And once you do it once, you learn so much that how can you not want to do it again? How can you not want to put everything that you've learned into
Make
practice?
the experience even crazier or more,
right.
remarkable, I guess.
Right. So it totally makes sense that it might be a different format too, so that it still has that element of creativity, but you can apply the lessons that you learned from this one towards the next one.
Fitting in with the brand, the Airstream starts with an A, so the A-frame, the Airstream. So we made sure of that.
That's a loose connection, but okay, we can go with it.
Container? We've thought about container cabins.
So not exactly there, but
I'll let the boys get out.
It's vintage, just like an A-frame is. I can see the
same era.
I can see the overlap there.
Didn't take much convincing, but
I think we really liked the initial part of it going up before we had anything cleared, and we did it a bunch of times. Or we had a couple things to do, like mark out maybe where the well or the drilling was going to happen, but like we just stood out in the woods, maybe made a fire, maybe didn't, and just hung out, drank some beers, and like just being out in the woods anywhere was really cool. And I think we're interested in the destination too. We've talked about that, just being in cool locations. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Hey guys, this is Janice. And in case you haven't figured it out already, we're pretty new at this whole podcasting thing. So it would be a huge help if you wouldn't mind taking a second to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify and some kind words over on Apple Podcast. This goes a long way in helping other cabin lovers find these conversations and hopefully become a part of them. Thank you so much, and we're excited to share more with you. It's time.
Hour in, we're going to flip it. I'm interested in, I think, similar to the questioning on our side, the timeline aspect of this. When we started talking to you, you already had Boone Cabin, and that's a bit bigger. Can you talk about what made you decide to do something similar but almost completely different in a completely different location?
So my first hosting experience was actually in my own house. So I, little known fact, ran a startup back in the day and went out to California and was in an accelerator in California. And it happened to be the sister accelerator to the one that the Airbnb founders went through. And they went through it shortly before I did. So when we were out there, my investors and advisors were constantly talking about Airbnb to us and telling us, because these founders, they like loved them. They were just starting to like find some success. And I was like, what is this Airbnb? And I don't think I'd used it yet at that point. And so I started looking it up. And when I got back to North Carolina, I was like, I'm going to Airbnb my guest room. I'm going to kick out my roommate. This sounds great. I have more control over my house. I'm going to set up a little Airbnb here. And like absolutely loved it. Met so many cool people. Like most notable experience was this like amazing Irish woman who was in town for a week for a psychology conference, and a hurricane happened to like hit. And so we were both like in the house, like cooking meals every night together, sharing wine every night. Like at the end of it, she left me this long note that was like, please come stay with me in Ireland. It was so great meeting you. But that was like the kind of experiences that I was having and just loved them. And on the other side, not my driving motivator, but it paid my mortgage. Like I never had to pay my mortgage anymore. Right. And so I did think about the financial side. I had a lifelong dream of owning a cabin in Boone and had a very small savings account that I was going to use to do that. But Airbnb was like teaching me that I could do it earlier probably than I had planned if I rented it. So I really just needed the startup capital. And so that was the next one, just because I loved Boone and always went for 10 years. I've been going to cabins there with friends. So I knew a little bit about, or a decent amount about that rental market from a traveler perspective. And that helped.
Definitely helped.
Yeah. And that one, never paid a mortgage there from day one. We always were able to book weekends. Weren't making a ton of money, but I didn't care about that. I cared about sharing Boone with other people in a way that like I could also host my friends. So we could stop renting other places and we'd all hang out there.
Yeah.
And I loved it, but it was a really large house. It was a foreclosure. And so there was a decent amount of maintenance to be done. And I just didn't have as much control as I would want. I was
rehab, or was
not much. It was actually in pretty good shape for foreclosure. Most of the stuff that I had to do was like very unsexy stuff. Yeah. Like I had to replace a retaining wall, $65,000 within the first 2 years of buying it, because I didn't have a structural engineer come in before I bought it. I'll never buy a house without doing a structural inspection, but I didn't do that. And found out shortly afterwards that like, oh, your house is going to fall down this mountain that it's on if you don't replace this retaining wall.
How old is the house? Is it like a really... The
80s. It's just a shittily built. They had one retaining wall that was stone and one that was wood, and the wood one just didn't hold up. And so we had to replace that within like the first year. So a lot of it was unsexy stuff, but basically I was like, oh wow, my hands are tied in a lot of areas because I didn't design or build this house. So I had like a dream of one day building one, and I knew it would be in Maine because my like half my family is up here and I just love Maine so much. And I viewed at this point Airbnbs as a way for me to like chase my own travel and retirement dreams and just do it earlier.
Right.
So building up here was just always the dream because my family's up here.
Then Freeport, is Freeport where you spend most of your time? Like, got a childhood family, or is it just like in Maine and you landed on Freeport for other reasons?
Freeport was more of a stopping point for us. We always spent our summers going up to the lake in like northern Maine, Sebec Lake. Yeah. And that was where all my fond memories are. But we would always stop in Freeport because that's where my uncle, aunt, and cousins were. So I'd spent a decent amount of time here, and I liked Freeport. I didn't dislike it at all. But when my mom passed away in 2016, it just became more important to me to spend time with family. At that point, my grandparents were still alive, and they were also here. Yeah. So it was like basically my entire mom's side of the family was all within a 15-minute radius of one another here. So that made this a pretty easy answer for where I would probably want to build. Not to mention my cousin's a builder. So that, like, I would joke with him for a while. I was like, oh, you're going to build my treehouse in your backyard or my tiny house or...
Well, excited to
think about building my entire house.
Yeah. And it was very much joking until the day that it wasn't. Yeah. And then I was like, so Corey, about that tiny house. It's time.
Remember you owe me that you think you promised that one time?
Yeah. And he was just like, yeah, I'm here for it.
Jumping back, it's super interesting that you went from the one-on-one person Airbnb experience, a room in your house, and were you renting your bedroom and then like sleeping on the couch?
No, it was a guest bedroom. Okay. It was a 2-bedroom house, but it's like a small
house. Yeah,
it's a 1,200 square foot mill house.
Very intimate. Yeah.
I think that's a super different experience on Airbnb where, you know, there's the option of, it tells you initially if you're going to be staying with someone in a guest house, at a vacation house, stuff like that. And that's something I've not experienced. And
so you've never stayed in someone else's house before?
Not with them there.
Yeah. It's a different experience. My early Airbnb experiences were all like that.
Austin, we stayed in someone's like guest house in the back.
But even that's, if you don't have to share a kitchen and like a bathroom with them, like until you've like tried to fall asleep while someone's throwing a party in their apartment while you're staying there, you haven't truly experienced Airbnb, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's tough.
I think that, that lends to your personality. You're very much a people person from the short time we've spent with you. And I think you absolutely have to be. And on the other side of things, the guest, like those people that are going to stay in someone's house with someone is going to be a people person, someone that's up for experiences.
Sometimes.
Do you have any horror stories? Name one horror story.
Okay. I mean, I have funny stories, but because I'm a people person, I don't view many of them as horror stories. I'm more just like, oh, that was a treat. We were right near a wedding venue, and so we hosted a lot of couples who were in town for a wedding, and they could walk home from the wedding venue. Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. But a lot of times, weirdly enough, like one of them was in the wedding party, and the other one would just have a lot of free time on their hands. And like, I'm a people person, so... Yeah. I remember one Saturday night coming home and we had a couple there. She was still partying at the wedding. He had come home, was super drunk. Oh. And I'm a host at heart. So I was like, oh, do you want anything? Can I get you a beer? Like, I just come home from a wedding because I filmed them. So I was like importing footage. He's like, yeah, I'll definitely take a beer. My boyfriend at the time started drinking with him. Before you know it, all three of us are drinking. And like, next thing you know, he's like peeing off my back deck. No. And he's just like, it's cool if I pee off your deck, right?
Yes.
And again, I'm such a people pleaser that I was like, yeah, no problem. I mean, the dogs pee back there. Like, you know, and the next day I'm like, did I just let someone pee off my back deck?
Well, that's
it. A horror story, but that's probably the closest I've come.
Yeah, that's another level of hosting.
And then like a huge transition to how many bedrooms is Boone?
3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a full basement. It's like 2,600 square feet. So it's like we were hosting 8 to 12 people. Right. So there we'll get like snowboarders. Like we had to raise the prices to avoid like frats because it's in a college town to avoid like that kind of stuff. Yeah. But much different kids, big groups of people, and very little interaction with folks. That was kind of the bummer about that one is like financially it was great. We got to go to the mountains all the time. Yeah. But I didn't really interact with people as much, which I kind of missed from in your house. You know exactly when they're coming, who they are, what they're doing, not in a nosy way, just in a like you cross paths a lot, you know, and
it's also your space. So it's like knowing kind of something about the people that are sharing your space is probably good. Yeah. Did you learn anything about being a little bit further away from the Boone cabin and from when you were hosting? What were some of the challenges there?
Yeah, because it's 2.5 hours away from where I live. So immediately it's like in your house, first of all, you already know if something's going wrong because you live there. So I just didn't have a whole lot of like, this isn't working or, complaints, honestly, when they lived there, just when I lived there, because I knew everything that was going on. So being 2.5 hours away, it became really important to have like a team of people who were like, I did all my own cleaning. So like finding a cleaner, finding a handyman, finding a plumber, finding an electrician, but it's like kind of a small rural area. So pretty quickly within that first year, I knew my plumber, I knew my electrician, I like knew all of them, had a good cleaner. And so that made it a lot easier. And honestly, until I started dating Shaun, who can do a lot of that stuff, I never made a trip up there for an emergency. I just had the right people to call. So I was never traveling up there for that stuff. But I would try and go up once a month to enjoy it. And then while I was there, I would like stock supplies and check on everything and just do like small tweaks.
I think cabins are, generally more remote things. So being a people person or just having conversations with people you meet is the way you get introduced to these people, these super crucial people that are going to help you out. Like we found some, handyman, people are going to plow, people are going to cut down trees, do landscaping, stuff like that, all through mostly Justin just kind of talking to people on the phone and asking where they work and,
There's
other people they know.
Those small towns.
Yeah. And that's huge because there's no companies, out in Stratton, Vermont, really, that they're not large companies like you'd find in a big city.
Right. So you're hiring individuals. And for me, I really like that element of it. Like here at Cozy Rock, our snow removal folks we found on Craigslist, but it's a guy named Ken and his son named Leo. And real nice guys, right? And like we met them, they did an amazing job of snow removal, but it turns out they also run an oyster company not in their spare time. That's like their full-time gig. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And they're like, yeah, we're opening an oyster bar down in Freeport, like this spring, summer. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And you like get to know them. And then when we ended up having our wedding here, like that's where we ended up having our wedding reception. So to me, like it isn't even just people who are going to help you with your business, but it's also a community in its own way. Yeah. And a way for you to like immerse yourself in the local community that I think can actually be really joyful. On top of like, thank you so much for helping us out. Like we couldn't do this without you. Our cleaner here is an artist in the area who creates like beautiful artwork and has also become one of our like closest friends in Freeport. We love her. And so it is.
And they always do something else too. Which is, I think that's the nice part. It's like, okay, you're doing the plowing, but okay, what else are you doing? There's always another gig or something.
They know someone. And when you view it as just community instead of like, who can I hire to do this? Yeah. Unexpected joy of managing it remotely.
What was your first step in Cozy Rock Cabin towards making this a reality? Like back to, it could be land, it could be design, it could be making a Pinterest board. Like what was like the first real step to figuring out something up here?
Definitely land. Yeah. I knew we could never do it without the right land. And I mean, and even before that, honestly, the financial piece is real. And I always feel weird just like glossing over this as if I had like magic amounts of money to like put into this. But my grandmother died right before COVID started. My grandfather had passed away a year or two before. And so when she died, my sister and I were left money. Right. And so like, I just want to acknowledge that like that privilege was a part of it. I would not have been able to afford to buy the land had that not happened. What I loved is that my grandpa's like favorite place in the world was always Maine. And it was why we spent our summers growing up here. And so there's a part of me that loves that when they left me that money, I immediately invested it in Maine. And that was like, honestly, the first step. But once I had the money, then I had a better idea of budget and like what I could afford. So we immediately, like literally within weeks of realizing that we had inherited money from them, started looking for land. We came up here in the summer and we looked at a couple pieces of land, and it's like, I don't know if you guys found this, but buying land online is like, you get no concept. You can look at pictures all you want, but like you show up and one of them was like infested with mosquitoes, which is like real in the woods, but it was like beyond anything I'd experienced. Right. And we stepped foot out of the car and they were literally attacking my face. Like 30 seconds later, I was in the car and I was like, I can't even look at this piece of land. And I was like, it's a no-go.
Well, that's what sucks. You go online and you just get a picture of the woods and you go, okay, is there a brook running in the middle of it? Is this a swampland? Yeah, so you're out there walking the land, just listening for running water. I mean, it's tough. It's not like walking through houses. So buying land is a whole nother.
Houses, you can get a general idea. You still need to like walk through them to know. But with land, it was just like, these pictures do nothing for me. Another one, we showed up and it was right off the highway and you could hear the highway. And I was like, this is not my vision for a quiet cabin. And so we had looked that summer and came home and had kind of given up on it. Like, we'll just wait a while and see. And then I saw a piece that popped up on Zillow and I was like, well, this one looks interesting. And I had my realtor come check it out. And she's like, it's not that great. But there's a lot right across the street that literally went on sale yesterday. She's like, it has this beautiful rock ledge. There's blueberries growing on it. That was the moment she had me.
Nice.
I like love blueberries. I have memories of picking them on a mountain in Maine when I was a kid. And I was like, it has blueberries. I'm sold.
She's like, yeah, but also 3 acres and also.
yeah, that's good. That's good. Trees. Okay, good. But blueberries, now we're talking. Well, and then I had my uncle come by because my uncle is kind of like what I would describe as like a typical Mainer, like pretty like stoic, you know, kind of down to business, just getting shit done.
Right.
And I was like, I need Uncle Rick to come look at it because he's going to tell me how it is.
Had you seen it yet, or you're still just going off?
Well, I was debating whether I was going to fly up.
Oh,
to
yeah,
see
right.
Because I now knew at this point you do not buy a piece of land without seeing it in person.
Yeah.
So I sent my uncle over and he's on the phone with me and I'm just expecting him to dash all my dreams and be like, it's all right. Like, you know, but he gets on the phone and he was like, yeah, here's what it is, you know? And then at the end, he's like, it's pretty nice. And I was like, oh, that's like a rave review of my uncle. He just said it's pretty nice. So I put in an offer that day. I was like, all right, if Uncle Rick said it's pretty nice, this is like maybe a good option. Put in an offer and we were under contract and then I flew up to see it.
I don't know if you know this, but one of the Maine state mottos is the way life should be. I personally think this is the perfect description of Maine, and I am probably guilty of overusing this phrase. Whenever I visit the cabin, the very first thing I do is head straight for the guest book because there's nothing I love more than hearing what our recent guests have been up to, where they ate, shopped, hiked, and what they enjoyed most about their stay in Freeport. This is one of my favorite recent entries. After 2 years of not being able to find time to get away since our engagement, walking into this inviting and carefully thought out cabin allowed us to finally take a deep breath. Having no cares in the world except keeping the wood stove going and our pup happy is our new definition of relaxed. If this doesn't describe the way life should be, I don't know what does. So if you're looking to get a taste of this, head to our Airbnb calendar and book your stay. And if you can't find any that work, don't forget to sign up for our email list. This is where we send any last-minute cancellations and where we open each seasonal calendar first. We can't wait to host you.
And I came up here and saw it and almost immediately knew. And then the last day before I left, I brought my hammock, I brought a 4-pack of beer, and I just hung it up in the woods. And I was like, I'm just going to like see how it feels to be here. And I still have a video I took of that. And that was the moment where I was like, this is going to be
I think
so
feeling
sweet.
it's huge. We did a lot of feeling out there.
Very
To
important.
figure out placement. And that's like, I ended up, when we came up to clear the land, we had a general idea, but we like pitched the tent in different spots. And we were like, how do we want to, we spent a while thinking about orienting it, but picking the land was definitely, and once you pick the land, then you have a better idea of like where you want to put it, what size you're thinking, where you want the windows, like all of that stuff. It just became a lot easier once you had the land.
I think when you're buying a home, you don't even consider that. It's almost just there. But
You
when
don't have a choice,
when you're
right?
building, and then, but it's so hard to orient. You walk into the woods, and sometimes it could just be acres of woods, and you just step in, and you don't even have boundaries. Maybe there's like a rock wall, 5,000 feet
Yeah.
that way. So it's to really sit in the woods and like
intimidating.
imagine where things are going to be and what it's going to look like one day. I mean, like you got to have, you got to be able to visualize that.
Yes.
Pretty good. It's tough. So
And it's all dollar signs because you're like, oh, I want it nestled back here. And then you bring in the site work people and they're like, well, it's more in this for tree removal. And then we have to like dig trenches for the power lines to go back this far. And it's going to be this much more. And like the septic field, like, and it just all adds up. And you have to like, it really tests how committed you are to that vision, what you're willing to compromise.
Was there something that landed you where your house is here, or was it? I mean,
look
of
at
course.
that.
I mean, it's the rock.
It's the rock.
cozy
The rock. It
We
was
got
always
as far
there.
into the woods as we could
And you
get
saw the
until we
rock.
hit the rock. And I was like, we're going to be nestled right up against this cozy ass rock.
That's perfect.
And that was where I like hung up the hammock and was like, this is going to be, and it was helpful to have some barrier. And then at this point, I think I knew Pete was going to be designing it because I remember FaceTiming with him on the land. I think when we cleared it, to talk about orientation and which way we wanted to face it. And then when he actually came to visit the cabin, I think I fucked it all up and we oriented it wrong. But his designs are so good with so many windows that like it didn't matter. We still had beautiful sunlight. But he was like, I think the sun is in a different spot than you said it was. And I'm like, this does not surprise me. This sounds just about right for what
this is opposite. But
Did you cold reach out to Pete?
Yeah, I messaged him on Instagram and I was like, hi, sir. I don't know what I said, but I was, I was like, I'm building a cabin in Maine and I've been scrolling Instagram and I've just been really overwhelmed with designs until I saw yours. And I was just like, this is it. Like, there's nothing else to it. This is it. And I said, except for the fact that I need a bathroom and I need running water and you don't seem to have that in yours. So,
is that mostly his style? He kind of really did cabin.
His first cabin, when I messaged him, I think he only had the one design that he was selling, which was the Raven House original. And it's the one that he built.
That's pretty close to this design.
Yeah,
pretty similar,
it's in the cabin porn book. It's like, one of, in my mind, I'm biased, but like one of the original cabins that kind of set off the cabin porn movement. Like he was one of the first cabins on Instagram that had like tens of thousands of followers. And it had no bathroom, no running water, nothing. And I didn't realize that until I bought the plans. And I looked at them and I was like, where's the bathroom hiding in here? And once I realized it wasn't there is when I messaged him.
It was a true cabin. It was.
And he might have responded right away, but he's like, I'm really busy. Can we get in touch in a couple weeks? Like, I can't remember. There was like a big delay period. I do not know what I was doing during that delay other than like maybe clearing the land.
Stressing out about it.
I honestly don't remember being stressed. I don't remember. And then he got back to me and he's like, yeah, let's work on this. So we worked together on the design, which is now the Raven House Northeast. But we really futzed around with especially the loft area and the stairs and like how to orient the bedroom, because there isn't a bedroom in the original one. So that was just like the most different part. The bathroom and the utility room were easy to add on. We just put them on the outside. But we had a lot of phone calls on like Saturdays where we'd sit there for like an hour or two and just play around with different thoughts on like how we could orient it until we landed on something that felt really good.
I was going to say futzed around was probably
weeks.
Because we were talking about timeline here too. And we bought our land before you bought that. Is that what we figured out?
Yeah. Like 7 months before.
Yeah. And then sounds like you just put the gas pedal down and somehow.
Oh yeah. But that's like my MO.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have.
That's what I think. Futz around was probably like you were on
all gas, no brakes.
Oh, I think Pete and I nailed down the plan in a matter of 2 weeks.
Which is fast.
Yeah. I mean, there were some things along the way, like when it came time to order windows, I was like working with my builder, but then I'd run everything by Pete. Yeah. Every time I came up here, I'd run stuff by Pete because I just had such a deep respect for his vision and what he had created that I really I cared a lot about this being a testament to his designs. Yeah. First and foremost, because I'm just obsessed with his designs and I like wanted it to be that. But second, I just respect him. I mean, through that process, I learned spoiler alert, we're gonna have Pete on the podcast, so I can't wait for you all to see this too.
Right.
But like
Very
he's just like the kindest human. He's so like slow speaking and intentional and thoughtful and just like, to me, he kind of epitomizes cabin culture. Right. Because that's what I think of, or people who are not caught up in like the speed of capitalism. I don't even know if this makes sense, but
slow down a bit.
Yeah, and I don't do that. I'm like, I have an idea and I'm like going to execute. And he really did force me to slow down a little bit. But I also think he appreciated that I was like, we're going to get this thing done. Because he wanted to see the plan. You know what I mean? Like it was win-win for both of us. But his presence and energy was so good for me from like day one.
I think going back to that original thing when finding a relationship with either whoever you're working with, builder or designer or anything.
It's everything. Yeah.
Like you have to be able to see similarly what your vision is. Either you're going to have something that's extravagant and someone's got to talk you down, and that's got to be a good relationship back and forth, or you have to push that person to like, represent what you see in your head.
Yeah. And the hardest part that I didn't see coming, because I assembled what I consider like an all-star team, and it was my cousin who has been building since he was like 16 and just like does really high-end builds, amazing attention to detail, also really good guy who's like pretty laid back, made the whole thing really easy. You have him, you have Pete, who I've already like sung his praises. And then my interior designer is named Jordan, and she had worked with me on some rooms at my house before and is also a friend of mine. And I just love her. Like she's worked for like Oprah magazine and like been on TV and like just has an amazing eye, but is also like.
How did you land this relationship with Jordan?
How did we first meet? She hired me to do a film for her. So I did a film for her, and then I fell in love with her work, and I was like, do you want to do a trade? Do you want to design my new house? This is the house I was living in North Carolina, and then I'll make videos about the process. So we did like a 4-part video series about what it looks like to design a room from start to finish. and she designed the room for me, and it's my bedroom at home, and it's like fucking amazing. She's just so talented. So I had these 3 amazing people, and then me kind of steering the ship, right? And
Orchestrating it all.
I was like, this is going to be amazing. But then along the way, there were a lot of moments where what the builder recommends comes in conflict with what the house designer wants, or what the interior designer wants is something that the builder is like, well, that's going to be really expensive, or that's going to be difficult, or that lead time is, and you just had, and I wasn't expecting to play this kind of like mediation role. And I think because I cared about all 3 of them so much, it became even more tricky. It wasn't just about what do I want. It became about like, how do I keep everyone happy? And how do I make sure everyone knows how much I respect their vision, even if in this moment I might disagree with you or want to push you a little bit. And that was the hardest part for me.
And you have to be a little bit selfish. Like you got to be firm on what you want, but like it's hard. It's a hard balance to keep everybody happy because this is your team. Like if you piss anybody off and this whole thing unravels.
And I just didn't want anyone to feel disrespected. Like I really valued all of their perspectives and their visions, but there were just times where I couldn't do all of them. So I had to make a decision, and that was probably the hardest part for me.
Did you ever get them around like the same table? Like did they all meet?
No, I will say when Pete came to visit the cabin, like after we had finished, I was like, Pete, whenever you want to come, like I will host you whenever. You don't have to pay anything. I'm so excited.
Is he local?
He's in Canada.
Oh, he's in Canada.
Yeah, but his wife has either, I think she's from Maine or has connections to Maine. And so he was supposed to come originally right away that summer, and then that got changed for some reason, and he came this spring. And so when he came, I hired a photographer to come and photograph him at the cabin because I really wanted images of like him here. Mm-hmm. And I also invited Corey. And so Jordan lives in North Carolina, so she didn't come. But the 3 of us, that was the first time we got to meet, and we like had beers and hung out here. And, I made them awkwardly pose for photos with someone that I hired. But I love those photos because it really is like it was the teamwork that built this place. And then
I think those are cool moments to like, and celebrate feels like a weird word, but we, I think, missed some of them, and like we just kept saying like we have to figure out to do something at certain like milestones and stuff, and you get so wrapped up in the process that recognizing certain points of the build is huge.
Yeah,
and
this is where we need to know your Enneagram number, because I'm an Enneagram 7. I did not miss a single opportunity to celebrate. We had champagne in our fridge constantly, and like building permit got approved, which took way longer than it should have. Popped that champagne, like we got the CO, popped the champagne, like whatever the milestone was. The 2 of us were quick to like pop a bottle of champagne and like celebrate it. Cabin warming, when we finished the cabin, we threw a cabin warming party and had. So Corey's company built it, and Corey was here for a lot of the big moments. But Jeff and Zach are the 2 guys who were here like every day. They were the ones like building every wall. Like, Corey was managing it, but like these 2 dudes were here like through the winter, like keeping warm around a barrel fire out back, snowboarding off the rock. Like they were like in it, right? These 2 like
also
built
working,
the cabin.
Also working.
But like apparently on Fridays, I came one time, we were in town, and someone went over to the snow and pulled out beer from like underneath the snow. And I was like, this is my kind of crew. Nice. Like it's just good dudes, like the whole team. And so when we had the cabin warming, it was so fun to have like them here with their girlfriends, and like to have Corey here, and like to have everyone that we could have here just celebrating in a finished cabin. Like that was probably my favorite moment of the build, to be able to celebrate that.
Which I think is good, because I feel like when you think about like cabins, it's always like, oh yeah, my grandfather built this cabin. There's always like, the story of someone who built this cabin. It's never just like, oh, look at my cabin. And like, you don't hear the story, but It's like, when you have the time to reflect on all those milestones, it's like, well, this is it. This is us building the cabin. This is Grandpa building the cabin. Like, here we are. So like, let's take that in. I think that's cool. Did you do any time capsule thing here? Did you put a picture of you on a wall somewhere? I feel like you must have done something.
We wrote something on the stud when we were here. We wrote a message of intent. Okay. There's a picture of it on our Instagram.
We did that, but
you didn't do it?
We'll have to get the chisel out and hit the foundation wall or something.
Do you remember what the message said? Was it a message to the future homeowners, or was
No, it was like, may this be a place that holds many happy memories for us and helps others see the way life should be for years to come. So it was very much about us first and foremost, which is what this cabin has always been about. We plan to retire here. But to me, almost as important, not quite as important, but almost as important, is being able to share this with other people, because I love Maine, and so many people in my life in North Carolina have never been here. So my goal always from the very beginning was, I want to create a place, not that people who are traveling to Freeport already will like have a nice place to stay. I want to create a place that brings people to Freeport, that they find. My platform was Instagram, that they find on Instagram and want to come. They're like, well, I don't know about Freeport. Like, it seems cool. And then they come, and we have this whole guest book of things for them to do. And they leave after 4 or 5 days and are like, well, shit, Freeport is like a cool place to go. And I loved the cabin. And those are the wins for me when I read guest book entries that like, we didn't want to leave the cabin, but when we did, boy, did we enjoy these 4 places that you suggested. Like, I like that about it.
I think Airbnb is recognizing that too in their categories.
Yeah.
They make. So there's cabins. There's just, I think there's one called like Wow or something.
There's so many now.
Where it's
Unique
like
spaces.
OMG. Yeah. And the trees
OMG.
or something. And people and the company is recognizing it that like they want to travel and do something cool. Like you can stay anywhere
And you don't care. Like,
and
where?
you could stay in someone's place too. That's just a house. But I think people are interested in doing something different, especially now. And that's kind of, I mean, we can get then into that in the later podcast, but the difference between just renting out, you know, a place or buying a place in the city or outside the city or near a venue or something that is just a house versus creating something that people go to. Yes. I think it helps people like step outside their comfort zone too. Just like, well, what's going on at this place? And it's like, well, there's skiing nearby, there's hiking nearby. And like, maybe I'm not a hiker, but like the kind of story or experience you're crafting is like, well, you know, let's give it a try. Yeah. And it's there and it's something different. And I like that it inspires that.
And then throughout the build, obviously you worked with your cousin, right? He built the place. I mean, was there any, because I know you asked us some questions about working as a team and like being friends and related. If we ran into any issues, I mean, were there any moments where in a way you're like, oh, I kind of wish I didn't know you because I would just scream at you about this? Or was it really always just like he understood your vision, he knows your personality, you both know each other, so it was a good team? Or was it just like, oh man, sometimes that's what, you know, when you hire people, you know, it's like, oh, this is tough because I really need to tell you this is not good. But did you run into any of this? Even, I mean, Pete, it sounds like you guys designed this pretty smoothly, but
yeah. I mean, there was one moment, and I would say we made it through the entire build. And honestly, both, I can be laid back. I can be pretty tight in some ways. Like I like to execute on something, but I can be pretty laid back. Like it takes a lot, I think, to really rattle me. And Corey is like one of the most laid back people I know. Like I love that about him. He would call me with stuff every day, and it just always made me feel at ease, like never stressed me out. It was at the very end when there were a couple things that didn't get done that were not like, it was the bookshelf in the loft, and then there is supposed to be a storage closet right underneath those stairs. It's supposed to pull out, and it's going to be like drawers and storage. That didn't get done in time. And that turned into like, I got really frustrated partially. And it was, and I regret, I mean, and looking back, like I wish I'd been able to be more laid back about it. But at the end of a build, as you know, and we had opened up the calendar, so we had guest booked. Yeah. And that's where I think the biggest misunderstanding is if you've never hosted before, you don't understand the idea that you can't just pop back in and like finish something. This is not a rainy day project when your team has like a spare day. You can kind of finish this up.
We're going to be at work during the day, so the door's unlocked kind of
and
deal.
My vision was like, we're going to be booked solid from the beginning. That was my hope. And it ended up being the case it has been since we opened it. And so we have, you know, a 5-hour window in between guests every couple of days, but our cleaner's here cleaning. Like you can't bring a team in here and finish something. Right. So it just ended up being, and we were drinking champagne around a fire when that fight came to a head. And I do regret that was not like the right scenario to address that particular issue. Yeah. So I definitely regret that. But that was honestly, looking back, if that's the only moment that we had any moments of tension. And Shaun has the skills. So he built that bookshelf at 2 a.m. the night before our first guest came, and that just got it done. So
maybe one of these days we'll interview Shaun and get his input on all the things he's added to Cozy Rock.
Did you have a tough time figuring out when you were quote unquote finished with your place, or did you got to a point and you were like, this is good?
No, yeah, we knew. I mean, because from a business perspective, I was like, we want to launch in the summer because that's Maine. That's the time to do it. We missed that deadline by a little bit. My goal was June 1st we would launch, and we ended up launching August 1st, I think was our first guest. I think we got our CO mid-July, and then we stayed here for 2 weeks furnishing it and doing all of that. And so there was just this really hard stop. Like we have guests arriving that day. And so those last couple weeks were no joke on us. Like for all the work that we didn't do along the way when the builder was working on it, it was just this never ending list of stuff. And we were every day, I'd be like, oh, we're getting closer, but then not really. And we'd be up until like 1 a.m. until that last night. It was like, you know, we went to bed at like 2 and then just had to be done. Now that said, since then, there've been a lot of like decor projects that we've worked on. But I would say I feel very close. Like the fire pit was one, finishing off the hot tub so that it's fully insulated is another one, and this last thing we're doing up in the loft. But once those are done, I feel like we're done.
You think?
Has anything changed since we saw you probably initially when you were at like 2,000 Instagram followers, and now you're at 69 something, 70? Did you cross the 70 line?
We did.
Wow, big milestone. Jeff champagne for that?
We did not. I have not. We've never popped champagne for followers.
And I know you said a lot of your bookings come from your Instagram following.
Almost all of them.
Is there anything specific that's changed about it since like you were smaller in following size to now that you'd like your previous self to know? Or you just been kind of running with it?
Early stages were so fun. Like there is a part of me who honestly misses 2,000 and less followers, because I feel like when we were building, people were in our DMs constantly in such a supportive, involved way. Like it felt like there was this community of people who were, for whatever reason, and to this day, I don't really know why, but I will take it, who were invested in the build to the degree that like I would post about this stove and like what direction should we face it. And it would be like days of conversations that would push my own thinking and like make me really think more deeply about it. And then just every piece of it, paint colors, like these 2 paint colors were given to me by Instagram followers who were like, if you need a white, I'll never search for whites again. This is it. And that's the white on our cabin, and it felt like there were these people that I didn't know in real life, and yet were such a big part of the encouragement and the momentum. And it did feel like, I don't know what the number is, but it did feel like there was a tipping point where when we started getting more, and it was like, wow, this is like really a thing, that those people started backing off a little bit for whatever reason. And I don't know, that point was also right around when we finished building. So there weren't as many like choices. It was more about hosting than it was about the build. So it could be that too. But I sometimes like miss my old Instagram friends.
I remember you saying on some of the stories that like it was very personal with that smaller group of people, and it's grown very big now, but you've still done an unreal job of like getting on there and answering questions and talking and chatting with people for 70,000 people.
Yeah, that's the fun part for me though. And still to this day, now the people I'm closest to on Instagram, some cabin owners, there's like a handful of other cabin owners. We hear from a lot of cabin owners, so it's hard for me sometimes to like get to know the people. So the ones that I've gotten to know in the early days when people messaged me, the first message I always send back was like, hi, I'm Janice, like hoping that they would introduce themselves, because I really hated having conversations with, I know the name of your cabin, but I don't know you as a human.
Like us, like our
all of it. Yeah. And so the ones like Alexis from Kingdom A Frame was a big one. And I don't know if she introduced herself or how that even started, but it always felt like a human interaction. And that was really beautiful. And so to this day, the people that I'm still closest with are those cabin owners who I know as humans and our guests. Like because so many booked on Instagram, the ones who like tag us, there's a handful I can think of now that I just like love. The couple who was here for Thanksgiving last year, she's become a good friend. She's in like social media stuff. So she's like hopped on Zoom calls and like coached me on TikTok, which is a mystery to me. And like, it's just like the kindest person. And so now it's with guests, which I actually really like, because a lot of them come back and they'll message me about just different things than the build. But I think I had more regular personal conversations during the build than we do now. Now it's a lot more strangers asking about the same paint colors and siding colors all the time, which is fine. And I'm happy to answer that, but that's not personal. There's no relationship there in the way that there was at the beginning.
I think wrapping up and kind of bringing it all together, that's one of the coolest things and the most significant things we saw very early on is how involved all the hosts are in this cabin, quote unquote, community culture, with answering questions, just being friendly, like kind of having this bond over either having a place or being interested in it. And the people, I think that's what kind of brought us all to this table here, literally.
Yeah. And I feel like that community is made up in my mind of like the hosts and cabin owners, the people who are building, and also the dreamers and the travelers, right? There's kind of these 4 buckets. Often the travelers are also dreamers. That's part of the reason why they like traveling to cabins, is because, and I like that, like, they're all equally valuable. Just because you have a cabin or have been hosting for 8 years it's just as valuable to have a conversation with a dreamer and like who still thinks about this as much as you do, if not more. I mean, man, when you're in that dreaming stage, it's all
You're just like, just getting everything.
And that's just such a fun stage that when you're deep in the weeds of a build or the hosting, you kind of forget about the allure of the whole cabin porn world that brought you here in the first place. And so getting to talk to people who are just dreaming is like so fun. But it's really energizing to keep talking to the people who are dreaming. And they're the ones most often in your DMs asking those questions. So while sometimes it's like, okay, I've answered this question 12 times on Reels, but like by answering it again, you just never know what relationship might come from that, or what like little boost you might give someone who needed that push to keep like doing it.
You just don't want to put the fire out. You gotta
I think that's it. Yeah. Even if I might be like, okay, I've answered this a bunch of times and this is not exciting to me anymore, this is deeply exciting to someone
else. That's their first step. They're like, oh, look at this, I just found this page. So that was
like
their
working
first.
on their mood board for the living room. And honestly, mood boards are what keep the dream alive during the build. And they're like, I just need the right paint color, you know? And it like really is that crucial. Yeah. Even though on the other end, it might be like, okay, Sherwin-Williams, cyberspace, you know, like to them, that's like, yes, I finally found the color.
It's free. Cyberspace is free. So what can we expect from cabin culture moving forward here?
I mean, my interest and hope is just to have more conversations like this with people in all different phases. I think it would be really fun to talk to dreamers, to talk to builders, to talk to hosts, all phases of that. Because I do think that in terms of like getting moving in that first step forward, information for a lot of people, it depends on your personality type, but for a lot of people, like that's the crucial thing to making it go from a dream to reality. So being able to like pool those resources, I think could be empowering for other folks, but also just fun for us to get to have those conversations with a whole bunch of different people. So if any of that sounds interesting to you listening out there, I don't know a whole lot about this world yet, but I do know that apparently liking, reviewing, subscribing, and sharing are pretty important. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, we definitely encourage you to tune in to the next episode where we'll be interviewing people besides ourselves. But also doing any of those things would be a huge help in finding other folks who might find something useful here. The fire's still not going, so we're going to have to sign off and really get that thing going. But until next time, thanks for joining us.
You guys, thank you so much for joining us for episode 1 of the Cabin Culture Podcast. Stay tuned next week for our very first official guest, Pete Long. Not only did he design Cozy Rock Cabin, but he is also the mastermind behind the OG Raven House Cabin located up north in Canada. What I love about Pete is that not only can he talk to us about some of the nitty-gritty things like building and planning and designing, but he also just has a heart for the cultures around cabins. Not about mass production, not about massive profits, but about escaping, about nature, about restarting, refreshing, all of the things that draw people to cabins in the first place. Pete seems to understand at his core. So I'm most excited not just for the how-to pieces, but also just to hear a bit more about the way that Pete looks at the world and how that shapes the work that he does. So make sure to join us. We'll see you then.